Conner Mantz have enough? Will he be edged out at the finish? Jamal Yimmer falls back. We have side by side. Too close to call at the finish of the Aramco Houston Matt half marathon. What a stunning finish, John.
I'm joined by my colleague, Alex Sear, who is on the ground in Houston, looking at an American half marathon record being broken before your very eyes, Alex. Way off in the distance, if you squinted, you could see 28-year-old Conner Mantz smash Ryan Hall's 18-year-old half marathon record. Let's unpack this record today, its significance, the fact that obviously it was a long time coming, and what this means for both Conner Mantz, who is right now right in the prime of his career and has so much promise, as well as what this means for American men's distance running moving forward in the next, let's say, 5 to 7 years. First things first, let's talk about this record. As I said off the top, you were on the course, and I know there's some twists and turns at the end, so you didn't actually technically see Conner Mantz break the tape. Or not break the tape.
I heard him being interviewed as I crossed the finish line, though.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah. So obviously he must have been very ecstatic. Let's talk about that. Let's talk numbers here. The old record was
59:43, set by a Ryan Hall, who, for people like us, is still a very present figure in our minds. For Google, maybe not so much. We were creeping through his old records to make sure that we had the right times, and it took like a few different scrolls to find the actual Ryan Hall. Who's the first guy? There was like a UFC guy who's now supplanted him as the #1 Google search.
This is a lesson for us all that time is merciless, and it seems like all people are forgotten in time and lost to page 2, 3, or 4, no matter how famous you are in the moment. Ryan Hall, one of the all-time great American distance runners, is not even, I don't even know if he's on page 2 of the Google search results. It's like a UFC fighter, a YouTuber called Ryan Hall Y'all, who are dominating search results when you just type in. You got to put in Ryan Hall runner.
Yeah. And then the weird thing that happens is on the second page of Google, it's full of this guy who looks just like Ryan Hall in the face, but who's absolutely jacked and can deadlift something like 500 pounds.
Yes, Ryan Hall has had a third act in as a hybrid athlete. And in 2021, for example, not to go down a Ryan Hall rabbit hole here, but he did like a 500-pound deadlift and sub 5-minute mile challenge, like right at the sort of the peak of COVID insanity on a track in California where he grew up and where he lives now. And the guy is like a monster. He looks like the Incredible Hulk now. So he has gone a different direction in his life and his career. And we can talk about that later, because we'll talk about legacy. We'll talk about what a guy like Conner Mantz wants out of running in the rest of his career in the next, say, 5 to 7 years. But Conner Mantz broke the record. He ran 59:17, which is a significant haircut from the previous record. That record stood for 18 years. That record just felt real dusty, Alex. As a case in point, that was well before the Super Shoe era, back in 2007. Ryan Hall ran in a pair of I had to zoom in on the pixelated old low res pictures of Ryan Hall smashing that record in Houston in 2007. And he was wearing like a pair of Asics, they look like tiny, ballet slippers. A very different time in running, very different time technologically. And obviously Conner Mantz broke the record in a pair of, I think it was Alpha Flies.
Yeah. Yeah. And now that the race has passed, it's a bit of a hindsight 2020, but you have to think about, was there a chance that this half marathon record was going to go down? Now, I think that it makes total sense that Conner Mantz was the one to break it. He somewhat quietly was destined for this record. His first half marathon was at the age of 12. And then he ran another one at age 14. And he dropped to 111. Okay. So talent is there. It's not really an at-home training recommendation advice, but very impressive. And then he's somewhat just had this perfect career, right? So it's this guy growing up in Utah, totally dominant high school runner, becomes a tremendous cross-country athlete at BYU, winning 2 NCAA cross-country titles. He becomes known for his grinding ability, especially over longer distance. Marathoner / half marathoner is written all over him as he comes out of college. And then sure enough, he quickly starts tackling the half and the full in his pro career. And to this point, Michael, he's 28 now. He has yet to run a bad marathon, though what just happened is on another level, but we'll get into that. But maybe we break down his last few years, right? He's had a really consistent marathon career. He's had an 11th place finish in Boston in 2023, went on to run 2:07 in Chicago, 6th place. And then I think he really made his entry into the zeitgeist of marathoning at the Olympic trials in 2024, running 2:09:05. You remember that. Clayton Young, they somewhat traded the league. Clayton Young kind of let him win, but at that time...
Like he acquiesced at the finish line,
Yeah.
Some people said, because, Conner Mantz is a Nike athlete, and perhaps there was more money at stake for Conner Mantz than there was for Clayton Young, an ASICS athlete, to win the Olympic trials. We'll never know. That will be left between the two of them, but he did technically win the U.S. Olympic trials, which, pole vaulted him into being an Olympian representing the United States, where he ran really well, 2:08:12 in Paris, finishing top 10, finishing in 8th. And then kind of put a nice capstone on the 2024, a big 2024, with 3 very impressive marathons by running in New York, running 2:09 flat and finishing in 6th place. And I was there for that, covering that event as well. And he ran very, very strong throughout that race. So it just sort of feels like this guy is a dyed-in-the-wool marathoner, like perhaps from a very early age, being a great distance runner his entire, basically, childhood and adulthood now, which leads to questions about kind of where he goes from here, but we'll get to that in a second. Let's instead take a quick step back here, and let's talk about some equivalencies here. Okay, because Conner Mantz he has run 6 marathons in his career starting in 2022. He, as you said, has not had a bad one. His personal best is 2:07:47 from Chicago in 2023, a flat course. And he's had quite a bit of success in Chicago, running there twice, running really well 2 times. He's running Boston this spring. So we know 2025 short term, he's running Boston this spring. World Athletics, the governing body of the sport, have these tables, which they updated. They feel fairly accurate. They're equivalency tables. You can actually, even if you're a recreational runner, you can go look at these tables. It's a PDF, which is annoying. So you have to scroll through like 1,000 pages to find your time. But even if you're, say, like a 1:45 half marathon runner, you can see what your equivalents are in different distances. The marathon is a tricky one. I feel like there's an exponential curve with the marathon to a degree. Not everyone is built to run the marathon. You got to get a perfect day to run a perfect time. But his equivalent is intriguing. When you put in that half marathon that he just ran, that 59:17, the equivalent is 2:05:25, more or less. And that puts him, that's a big jump, first of all. That's a 2-minute jump. So that's, question mark on that one. Don't think we're going to see that jump in Boston unless there's an extraordinary weather day with a fabulous tailwind that can transform the Boston course, which is very difficult, into like a magic carpet. Barring that, probably not going to see that this spring. But do we see that in the future? And that number is intriguing because the American record, which is even older than this half marathon record that he just broke, it's going on 23 years old this April, was set in London in 2002 by Khalid Kanuchi, who ran 2:05:38. That's an old record that a lot of great runners, a couple of generations of runners now, have taken a kick at and not successfully taken down. Ryan Hall couldn't do it. Galen Rupp couldn't do it. Those are 2 people that I think, right off the top of my head, are obvious comps to Conner Mantz. And when we're thinking about legacy, we're thinking about all-time American great distance runners, Conner Mantz is sort of below those two guys right now and could kind of jump over them if he's able to live up to this gigantic potential that he has now shown.
Yeah. And I think the question is that potential legit? Like, how to digest a 59-17 from Houston? Is that indicative of a real 205? Will we say that these equivalency tables are wrong? I'm going to go with no. I think we need to take a second to appreciate how good that race was for Mantz. So when we're talking about all of his marathons in 2023, 2024, his appearances in the half around that time would put him at around 61 minutes. He had run in the 60s, around 61. Coming up to Houston, the conversation around Mantz was, would he beat Joe Klecker, fellow American runner, and they would both somehow try to run near the current American record? At the press conference, Conner Mantz, known to be very confident himself, kind of talked himself out of it, saying, training's just been going okay. I don't feel totally fit, but I'm going to do my best and see what happens. So by the time the race started, Michael, I'm going to out you. You gave it to Klecker. You thought Klecker was going to potentially break the American record and certainly beat Mantz. And so you could guess my surprise when I finished and saw that Mantz had run 59-17. To me, that's a breakthrough performance. This also isn't to mention how the weather in Houston was just okay. It was cold. It was nice for me, a Canadian, right? The temperature was around 0 degrees Celsius, 32 Fahrenheit throughout the entire race. It was fairly windy, gusty, and that split between 13 and 18 kilometers, so miles 8.5 to 11, had everyone, including Mantz, drop their pace by about 10 seconds per mile. It was not at all a perfect day. So 59-17, with all those things considered, the weather, Mantz's non-confidence is mind-blowing to me. I think this is a breakthrough performance that's indicative of something like a 205 mid.
Using historical comps, because we've talked a lot about Ryan Hall already, and we've touched upon Galen Rupp, Kali Canucci briefly, because this is sort of all of a sudden the company that Mr. Mantz is keeping in the American distance running history books. As an interesting point of reference, Ryan Hall in 2007 followed up the run that he ran in Houston as well, setting the American record in the half marathon at that time. He ran 2:08:24 in London, typically a significantly faster course than Boston is, and also takes place 1 week after Boston. So they're sort of aligned in the same trajectory with a different race set up for April for each of them. And as a point of reference, of course, Hall did not run in the super shoe era, so you can do the 4% math if you'd like. That's a controversial, complex question mark in the history. It's thank you, Nike, for making this even more confusing for all of us, although, well, we're all happily taking the haircuts on our personal bests with super shoes in the last 7 or so years. But, so Ryan Hall, his all-time best marathon, Boston, 2011, 2:04:58, right when he was in the peak of his powers, totally in his prime. An all-time day. I was there in Boston. I ran Boston that year. Ill wind all the way in that perfectly aligned with the point-to-point course in Boston. Also still stands as the course record Jeffrey Mutai ran just ahead of Ryan Hall. That Ryan Hall's official personal best on a record legal course was a 2:06:17. So I think that Conner Mantz is in that ballpark in terms of like being able to run 59:17. And then I think the expectation now will be that he makes a pretty significant jump in the marathon in the next couple of years, which leads me to the next question. What does Conner Mantz want out of his career? Where does he go from here? What's the plan? He works with an excellent coach in Ed Eyestone, who he has obviously trusted for pretty much his entire adult life with his running, because Eyestone was his coach at Brigham Young University for many years before he went professional, and he remains his coach at Eyestone. Eyestone, former Olympic marathoner himself, really smart guy, really knows the distance well, very like strong in terms of like psychologically preparing his athletes. The trust is obviously there. Where does a guy like Ed Eyestone and where does Nike, who who's the key sponsor for Conner Mantz, where do they guide him in the next 5 to 7 years in this prime of his career? Because the marathon is a fickle discipline. It's a tough career. A lot can happen, and in a snap of your fingers, you can go ahead 7 years and look back, and you ran a couple of Olympics, maybe a world championships. You missed a couple of seasons with injury. You took a couple of cracks at Boston and New York. Maybe you went over to London once and it didn't pan out. And next thing you know, you're looking back and you've got a 207 as your PR, and there's a big what if. What if? And I see that with a lot of careers. There's a little bit of that with Ryan Hall. There's a little bit of that with Galen Rupp. Both those guys have actually put down 206s as their on the books personal bests, although Hall's got that nice Boston time, that 204 high. How does Conner Mantz sort of plan his career moving forward to totally capitalize on his extraordinary talent?
That's such a question, because as much as I think most pro athletes expect that they'll be at this for another 10 years, especially if you're a 28-year-old like Conner Mantz, the reality is he's a 59 low guy now. And so what he does this year and next year really matters. And the marathon has become much more complicated of a beast too in the last few years in terms of what you chase. I think there was a time when it was kind of obvious, like he's going to do Boston, he's going to do New York, and he's going to do the Olympics. That's what marathoners do. Nowadays, I think he needs to ask himself, and he needs to look into his contract to see what makes most sense. Should I chase championships or should I chase times? Why should he not focus on races like Valencia, which might not have the clout of a Boston Marathon, but can make him run way faster potentially? Or why wouldn't he sign up for the Marathon Project, which is happening in Arizona in December, which is this like startup-y type race where people go and try to run fast times, and most Europeans have never heard about it. It's very just American. What's his goal? Does he want to pop a 204 or 203? And if that's the case, is Boston the best place to do that? Or does he want to become known as the Olympic champion, the Boston Marathon record holder, the New York City king? I don't know.
Yeah, and these are competing ambitions as well, right? They don't necessarily they never all align. It's sort of like points of a triangle, right? Because the other very important point of the triangle here is making a living, is money.
Dollar bills, y'all.
Where are you going to earn the most? And that's why it's sort of one of the not so secret reasons why you see a lot of American runners, especially American runners of note, show up at Boston and New York year after year, is because between those races giving you an appearance fee that's going to be significantly more than an appearance fee from, say, Valencia, typically, as well as your brand, if you're, say, with Nike, an American brand, you want to see maximum impact at the sort of optimal moment. And Boston, New York, Chicago, those are the three pinnacle American races that are going to move the needle for Nike for selling shoes, right? So I think the only time you have alignment of the ambitions of making an optimal amount of money between appearance fees and what you can do with your own feet in terms of performance and making performance-based incentives, and then also running that fastest time you can possibly run in the ideal conditions, and then being competitive and maybe being a champion or getting on the podium in a big event. I think Chicago really is the only one that makes sense for Conner Mantz. So I wouldn't be surprised, because also Chicago's, at least for now, it's a Nike race, right? It's a Nike's only marathon major that they sponsor, and they can really shape the event and market Conner Mantz. I mean, look, a few years ago at the heyday of Galen Rupp's career, they basically manufactured a race for Galen Rupp to win, which he did. So Galen Rupp has won one marathon major in his career. I mean, that's a huge achievement in a marathon runner's career, especially an American marathon runner's career, to win a major. Although it kind of felt like the elite field was sort of like steered towards having Galen Rupp have a banner day. You may see that with Conner Mantz in maybe Chicago 2027. You may see Nike sort of align the elite field for Conner Mantz to smash it out of the park, run an American record, and also maybe win the race at the same time. The cherry on top, right? Let's look here. A couple of dates to keep in mind for Mr. Mantz's career. World Athletics Championships are in Tokyo this year. This will be his age 28 year. Does he get pulled by the lure of wearing the red, white, and blue in a big-time World Championships because Tokyo will be hyped up because Japan is obsessed with distance running in the marathon? That's a question mark. I say no. I say he steers clear of that. I say instead he runs Chicago or New York.
I think that's a hot take.
Really? I mean, I think he'd be foolish to run World Championships. Then 2027 World Championships. So that's in 2 years. He will be 30 years old. The World Championships are in
Beijing.
Gonna go ahead and say skip that one, Conner Mantz. I'm not sure if you're going to run a really great marathon in the smog of Beijing.
In the smog and the heat. Yeah. Yeah.
2028 LA Olympics. I mean, just like you put that one in pen in his schedule. Barring some sort of injury or a great crop of young athletes that we have not yet seen emerging at age 31, I can imagine Conner Mantz will be gearing up for the LA Olympic Marathon. Then 2032, 35-year-old Conner Mantz. The Olympics will be in Brisbane. Be interesting to see if he can have that longevity in his career. So I think that'll be a really interesting question to see what this guy chooses to do over the next, let's say, 5 years, and whether or not getting that American record is something he becomes obsessed with, or if he approaches things in a more organic way, runs New York, Boston, takes a crack at faster times in Chicago, because obviously New York and Boston are not historically that fast. Be really interesting to see. What do you think he should do?
What I think he will do, given Mantz's disposition of always on all the time. He's a big racer. He runs workouts hard. He races a lot. Maybe the answer on whether he's going to chase times or titles is yes. All of it.
Yes to everything.
Yeah. I'm kind of serious. I think he might be the type of guy who tries to get it all. And perhaps that's being hungry or greedy, or perhaps that's the making of one of the greatest marathoning careers ever. And Mantz, I think, has already become the guy that maybe his opponents or watchers are saying, oh, this guy's on a collision course with burnout. And then he just keeps proving people wrong just because he's that intense and because he races a lot. But some people are built different, and I think Mantz is built a little different.
And then the final question, of course, which we're only going to find out in 10 to 15 years' time is, will we one day be watching a YouTube video of Conner Mantz deadlifting 500 pounds and sprinting through a sub 5-minute mile?
I'm going to go with no, dog. No.
I would have said the same thing about Ryan Hall 15 years ago. So you never know. And we'll leave it at that.